All right, joining us now, we've got Vinayak Chatterjee, Chairman at Feedback Infra, who's going to be sharing with us some of his outlook on demand and how it's been impacted by the second wave and how things are coming back. Vinayak, good morning. What is the status as you see it on ground? Do you feel that rural demand particularly has been hampered, that we will perhaps see impediments to the recovery? What's the sense that you're getting?
Well, to answer your first question first, there is clear evidence that rural demand is not as buoyant as it was in the April, May, June, July period of last year. And remember, it was buoyant largely because there was a slew of special packages that were given to the rural sector, including a step up in the Manrega, in small rural infra work, special packages. All those have not been seen now. And therefore, from sales of tractors to retail demand for cement, etc., rural demand is showing stress vis-a-vis last year. So it's not going to be that much of a demand support in current times. But if I have your permission, will you allow me to do a very quick scan of the opportunities and outlook for key 5 sectors? I'll do it very quickly. Highways, rail, renewables, water, and electricity transmission, because I think it is the combination of these 5 that will impact companies and markets. So is it all right if I give you a quick update?
Sure, Vinayak.
Okay. Look, highways is holding well. From a record 36.4 kilometers a day last year till 31st March, April, which was expected to be horrible, has actually clocked 28 kilometers a day. So kudos to all concerned. However, the situation on the project sites is far more stressed this year because of the labor migration, because of on-site infections, which are much larger, and logistics disruptions. It's not just about steel and cement, it's about sand, aggregates, many, many small things that go into a road site, which are often not discussed. But overall, I think highways is expected to be the big demand driver, and a whole bunch of EPC companies are actually going to see a steady year, if not an extraordinary year. So to that extent, markets should be assured that between NHAI and states, and some of the states are doing very well, by the way, Maharashtra on projects like the Nagpur Expressway, or UP with 4 expressways, and many other states. So between the center and the states, this is a market for EPC companies that I think will hold well, even in the current stress. Now let's turn to, and I think the estimated market size is anywhere between the order book position or under execution is anywhere between 1.5 to 2 lakh crores. So that's a very sizable market for EPC companies, and it probably has the least worry lines other than some issues of liquidity, which I will talk later. Now, rail sector, remember, rail sector is not often discussed as much as the highway sector. But in terms of total investment, it has practically caught up with the highway sector. But I think most media reporting does not give adequate importance to the capex work that's happening in the rail sector. Last year, very few people know that it almost equaled the road sector with 1,61,000 crores of capex delivered. These included projects from new lines, gauge conversions, doubling, tripling in high-density corridors, electrification, regional rapid rail, metros, ongoing works in the DFCC, dedicated freight corridors, etc. So please remember that the railway system has almost caught up with the highway system in terms of the total size of the order book that it is giving for contracts. This is a point that repeatedly gets missed in most of the interactions with media. So I actually want to highlight that railways is a big market now for engineering, procurement, and construction companies. And the good news there is that there is a lot of data from the field that their payments are relatively timely compared to most other government departments. So there is hope there for railways, and therefore the budgetary provision this year is actually 2 lakh crores of capex spend. Even assuming 75% is done because of COVID and all of that, that's a very, very sizable market. And I do know most EPC companies, the large ones, are all involved. And if you ask any one of them, KEC, Kalpataru, L&T, all of them will tell you that the proportion of their rail orders to total orders has been increasing significantly over the years. That's something for you to watch. Coming to water. Now, water is, to my mind, in Indian media, both print and audiovisual like yours, it's the most unreported sector, right? Now, in January this month, the FM took a review of all the water projects under the National Infrastructure Pipeline, and that added up to a little short of 4 lakh crores, right? This is the size of the market which is under implementation between Jal Jeevan Mission, between minor irrigation works, between water bodies, water harvesting, watershed management, big projects like the Polavaram lift irrigation or the initiation of Ken Betwa, the Nal Se Jal program. There is a lot of stuff happening in the water sector. My guess is that the size of the market is about 60,000 crores per annum. And these benefit companies who are in the business of pumps, valves, pipes, and all associated stuff with water, including purification plants, etc., etc. But it is a sector that is, just out of the radar. Nobody discusses water sector. And I must also fault the ministry and the media that the media does not probe sufficiently in terms of order books in hand and what is happening on the field. The ministry also does not give out regular statistics. And the media is biased because most of these contracts, barring a few large ones, are with small local companies who are not listed companies. So you really have no interest in probing this sector. Whereas a vast amount of work is going on, and my guess is 60 to 75,000 crores per annum worth of work is happening across many small EPC local contractors from the village to the district level. So it is an under-examined, under-reported sector, but of sufficient interest for companies that manufacture anything to do with the water sector. Now, moving on to the renewable solar sector, very short point. It's a very stressed sector now for various reasons. I'm not going to get into depth. The latest instance of SoftBank exiting actually sharpens the glare on the problems afflicting this sector. But suffice to say that there's about 40,000 megawatts of projects under implementation. Now, it's not a very large construction-intensive project, but it tells you the size and scale of the work that's happening on the ground. And the last thing I want to say is on the electricity transmission sector. Right now, my back of the envelope evidence is that the market size is about 40,000 crores per annum on electricity transmission. A lot of it is geared towards the Northeast. And people who are in the business will tell you that they're seeing great order books from Assam and many of the northeastern states. And these together give you a sense that while much of manufacturing, much of services is very stressed in these pandemic times, across these 5 sectors between center and state, there is a sizable order book. If I add up the total, it would be anywhere between 6 to 8 lakh crores to my mind, which can fuel the demand and activities of engineering and construction companies. And therefore, there is relatively less to worry about. I'm choosing my words very carefully because there's lots to worry about, but relatively less. Let me stop here.
Okay, very comprehensive. We've covered perhaps all the points which I would have asked you in follow-up questions, but I always have follow-up questions when you give us so much food for thought. So let's pick up the sector where you think media is biased, the water sector.
Yes.
Let's understand where that sector is headed, because one side you got state schemes, you got municipal schemes, and you got a central scheme. How do you see the shape of this sector moving? Because this is one sector where perhaps three pillars are at play or 3 layers are at play.
Well, there is a 4th, which is the panchayat level. Most of the Nal Se Jal program, water to villages, is at the panchayat level. So there is panchayat, municipal, center, state. And I find it peculiar that most infrastructure analysts, including me, by the way, we don't sufficiently focus on this sector. Very few journalists go to the ministry and ask searching questions. There is very few ground data by choosing, let us say, key districts to even have a sample sense of what is happening on implementation. But you have anecdotal evidence that there is much action happening and there are large budgetary provisions. So I mean, this is the maximum answer I can give you right now.
Okay. When you say the highway sector has done exceedingly well, what is next? Because best of the investment, best of the order book, and the golden period of re-rating is behind the highway sector. And there's also a limitation to how much the sector can actually absorb, and there's also a limitation to the highway needs of India. I mean, the Indian roads are much better than what they were 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So where is that sector headed? More like a late single-digit growth or early double-digit growth?
No. So what you find is a structural change in the highways business. You know, the first 10, 15, 20 years was about expanding existing alignments. You took a road from Delhi to Jaipur, and if it was a 4-lane highway, you made it 6 or 8, and you did this number across the country. We are now finding that there is a limit to how much you can expand existing alignments because they go through very crowded clusters. So the new focus is on greenfield expressways. If you see, the Mumbai-Pune under Mr. Gadkari then was one of the first examples of a greenfield expressway. Now you have 4 greenfield expressways in UP. You have Mumbai-Nagpur, which is a greenfield expressway. You have Chennai-Salem, which is greenfield expressway. You have Delhi-Mumbai, Delhi-Amritsar-Katra. So the market is shifting to more greenfield expressways than the traditional method. And once you absorb this, then you will realize that that is the next life for national highways and even so for state highways. So that's a new market opening up because India, once it gets back to normal, will have to have a new series of expressways to carry the growth of GDP. But let me stop here. That's the main point.
BOT versus EPC. If somebody is looking for, let's say, investing in this sector based on your thoughts that a new market is getting created, there are 2 models, EPC and BOT. The BOT model, in a sense, has been slightly puffy-duffy for a variety of factors, and EPC is more like a low return but a stable business. Where would you recommend our viewers they should invest?
Right now, under the current policy regime, you should not invest in BOT because the traffic risks are too high for anybody to estimate for 30 years. Forget the current, the best economist in the world cannot predict traffic for 30 years, which has been the traditional BOT model. So if the government consciously changes the BOT model to remove traffic risk, right, which is being done under hybrid annuity, because then you get a fixed return, or you extend the concession period till, this is called the least present value method of a BOT, that you allow a flexible concession period so that the investor is allowed to, in case traffic falls, he is allowed to carry on for the next 5 or 10 years. And if the traffic exceeds expectations, his concession period is to that extent pro rata cut. So unless you give a flexible concession period in BOT that broadly eliminates traffic risk, it is a too risky a sector to invest now because of the difficulties of estimating traffic. EPC is the best bet, then is HAM, and this is where it should go, unless there is very clear-cut policy changes on flexible concession periods, which is a very popular PPP method called LVPM, least present value method. And I see no reason, and in fact, in my some of my discussions with Secretary Highways and Chairman NHAI, they have in principle bought the logic, saying it's very logical that you have a flexi concession period that removes traffic risk. Over to you.
How different is the railway sector this time? You alluded to certain points that on a relatively the payments are better. There's a large capex which railway does, but railway always has been doing this capex. So how last 3 years, how next 3 years would be different from last 3 years for railways?
Railway capex has multiplied. It is not enough to say railways has always been doing it. The railway capex traditionally, if you go back 4-5 years, was 30,000 crores, 40,000 crores. Now we are talking of a budget of 2,15,000 crores, 5 times, 5x compared to 3 years ago. It has seen a massive jump. And also there has been fairly high level of discipline in project management and in payments on projects. I for certain know that the ministry has taken some key decisions where whenever there was a period of 2-3 months of liquidity stress, it has actually stopped some of the low-end projects and prioritized ongoing projects. So the liquidity management, including from organizations like RVNL, from Core Allahabad, which is Center for Rural Electrification, from the railway zones, from Rail Bhavan, the project management focus and liquidity focus on release of liquidity has been there has been a sea change in the way it has been managed compared to earlier years. And I said, from 40,000 crores to 2,15,000 is 5x. And it is almost beating the road sector. But most of the discussion is about Indian highways. How much discussion happens on what are the key railway projects? How are they doing? What is the per day kilometer? How much has been achieved? Very little discussion, like the water sector. Media is obsessed with the highway sector. I don't mind that, but there are other sectors doing equally well and contributing.
But where will railway be able to fund so much of capex? I mean, thank you for sharing with us. I always thought that railways had a large capex number, but I didn't know it 30,000 crore is going to 2 lakh crore. So very thank you for that. Where will they fund it? I mean, we know that the privatization drive in railways has started, but is that enough?
It's a good question. There are doubts about it. See, out of this year's budget for railway capex is 2.15 lakh crores, of which 1.1 is allocation from the budget. So half of it is coming from the budget. The other half is basically saying off-budget resources, which means railways have to float bonds. It has to attract private capital. It has to take loans from public systems. It has to manage the balance 1 lakh from its own. Now, can it manage 1 lakh crore from its own? I am not sure. The answer is not very clear under current circumstances. But I am saying, even if it does 40% of that, see, 1.1 lakh crores comes from the budget. Let us say if it's another 1 lakh crore, it raises 50,000 crores. It is still 1.5, 1.6 lakh crores of railway capex. Even if one is downplaying their ability to raise finances in the current situation, it is still very high capex. And they have demonstrated 1.6 lakh crores last year. So obviously 1.6 lakh crores was found from somewhere or the other last year. That is the capex on the ground last year.
Fair point. So closing comments, Mr. Chatterjee. This is outside the infrastructure sector, but it's about how things are moving in the infrastructure and the infrastructure ancillary sector. Every sector has seen a major consolidation. The big have become bigger, and the bigger ones have become mega. What is happening in the infrastructure sector? Are smaller SME, medium level companies, whether they're engineering or whether they are EPC or whether they are doing turnkey or whether they are into engineering, are they getting crunched out? Are we in a situation where in the infrastructure sector and the infrastructure ancillary sector, handful of large companies will survive?
That's an extreme position, but your analysis is tending in the right direction. What we find is that the bigger companies with their muscle with the banks and their credibility, etc., are able to, the key to infrastructure sector is not about getting order book. There is enough order book going around. The key is liquidity management. And that key opens the lock, will only open the lock if the banks give you bank guarantees and liquidity for startup and running the projects in a situation where liquidity is stressed across most sectors. I mean, over and above my positive remark on railways, it is a general comment that liquidity release is still a big issue. And therefore, the bigger boys are able to access liquidity, which the medium and smaller EPC companies are crying and struggling because the banks are completely unsupportive on bank guarantees and including release of liquidity, which under various schemes, the RBI allows, but the banks kind of paper over it and release to the minimum extent possible to reduce their exposure. Therefore, the MSME sector of EPC and ancillaries are suffering quite badly, whereas the big boys are managing. So like many other sectors, your analysis is directionally correct, that the big boys are increasing their market share, the smaller ones are gradually being driven out of the market. Over to you.
I'm tempted to ask you one more last question. Nayantara was following up a story with you on how exactly companies are dealing with this parabolic rise in commodity prices. What is your understanding? I mean, do all companies have passed through? Do state governments respect in orders when there is a spike in commodity prices? Are we in a time where most of the companies will suffer because of this rise in commodity prices? Why don't you share with us? I mean, there is a lot of confusion as to how this impact of commodity prices will be felt and who will really bail the cat.
Most will suffer because, first of all, there are fixed contracts, right? Under many of the PPP or various contracts, there is a fixed fee contract. There, very clearly, they will suffer unless they can wriggle out of it. Then there is these contracts, which are PWD type contracts, which say that we will compensate you for increases in major items like steel and cement based on the index of wholesale price index for construction equipment, construction material. Now, traditionally, the index of construction material, inflation index, has been mathematically so constructed that it, by and large, doesn't quite reflect the humongous increase in commodity prices. Even if it does, by the time that mechanism comes into play and payments are released based on a series of approvals, the project already suffers because the working capital has been used up because of the high prices. So even when there is the best, of course, is when you have a construction contract like you're building a factory. and the client tells you, I will give you the steel and cement, you only charge me for your construction related activities. Then it is safe, but then somebody else is taking the can, the owner is taking the can. But where the owner is not taking the can and a large portion of the risk is either in a fixed term contract or in a contract that mandates Sarkari type increases based on the inflation wholesale index of construction material, by and large, there is sufferance. Does that, I hope that answers Nayantara and your question.
Yes, it sure does. Great to have you on the show, Mr. Chatterjee. Good speaking with you and getting all that insight as always. Quick status.